Welcome to the DoughRoller Money Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Berger, and today in episode 209, we're going to talk about how to read a book. I know, it seems sort of basic, but I actually get this email from a lot of folks. How do I read so many books? And, do I just sit down and read them, or, how do I process the information? And so we're going to focus specifically on personal finance and investing books. And, I'm going to give you my sort of tips on how I do it. It works for me, and maybe it'll work for you as well. For the Daily Dough, we're going to talk about something that happened to me where I almost made a bad decision. I didn't. I caught myself at the last minute, and I'm going to talk about why I almost made that bad decision and how we can apply that really to all aspects of our lives, but in particular personal finance and investing. And then we're going to finish off today's show with the question of the day from Octavian, which the coolest name ever. So he wins that award, but he wants to know about the real estate investments that I own and how I manage them and how I owned them and how I work with my business partner, who also happens to be a long-time best friend from high school, how we work together. And so I'm going to answer his email for the question of the day. So let's get started. So this topic about how to read a book, I actually encountered an article some time ago it wasn't involved with personal finance or investing, but there was an article about how to read a book, and I thought, that seems kind of silly. I mean, you kind of open the book and you start reading. Do I really need an article on how to read a book? But I was intrigued. I read it. It was kind of interesting. But over time, listening to actually some podcasts about this topic and reading some other articles, I actually refined the way I read books, particularly nonfiction. In fact, everything that I'm going to say today about how to read a book deals with nonfiction. When it comes to fiction, I just sort of sit down and read it and enjoy it. But with personal finance or investing books or books about productivity or careers or business, I'm really not wanting to just sit down, read it, be done, put it away, never think about it again. I'm hoping that I'll learn something in the book that will help me become a better investor, help me manage my money better, help me to run my business more efficiently, more effectively. And so I'm really wanting to get something out of this book as opposed to just reading for entertainment. And so I've kind of come up with a system, and I'll be honest, I've stolen it, frankly, from a number of different sources. I've borrowed from different folks who have talked about this, and I've just put together something that works for me. And it's pretty straightforward. And I'm going to walk through it. There's sort of, 5 steps, really, to how I read a book. And the first one is, and this was really hard for me, is I don't read every single word. And it sounds silly, and you've probably heard this concept before. I'm not a particularly fast reader, so I'm not talking about speed reading. I'm not, the folks that have their finger on the page and they zip through page after page after page after page in seconds, and then they can apparently answer any question about the book. I'm like the opposite of that. I'm like the slowest reader ever. It's amazing I ever got through law school. I'm a very slow reader. I'm the person that reads every single word, and I have that little voice in my head that sort of reads the words, to me. Apparently, the thing you're not supposed to do if you're a speed reader, I do that. So I basically do everything wrong. But I do retain what I read. I guess that's good. But what I've found, particularly for nonfiction books, is that it's silly to read every single word. Again, it's not a speed reading concept, but I will come to passages in a book, and for a couple of different reasons, I'll say I don't need to read this to get out of this book what I need to get out of it. Sometimes the author goes into a story, and it may be a very interesting story, and for other readers, it may be very important. But if I make a judgment call, I don't need to hear this story, I skip past it. Or maybe it's an investing book and they're talking about a very basic concept. Let's say they're spending 2 pages or maybe even an entire chapter explaining mutual fund expense ratio. Well, I may not skip it entirely, but I'm going to skim through that pretty quickly just to see if there's by chance some new concept or angle that maybe I'm not familiar with. But I'm not going to read every single word of that. I don't need to at this point. Now, when I first started investing, I had no idea what an expense ratio was or its implications for our investments. So I would have hopefully have read that very carefully. But again, if it's a concept I'm very familiar with, I might skip it. I might skim through it very quickly. But that helps me, get out of the book what I need to get out of it, and in a shorter amount of time. So it's a very basic sort of concept, but I think it's important, particularly in my line of work. I read a lot of books if I'm doing my job right, and if I were to sit down and read every single word, nothing would get done. So that's sort of the first thing. Now, if we sort of get into the more substantive approach to reading a book, point 2 is, do you read a physical book or do you read, on a Kindle or an iPad? And I've gone back and forth. Maybe it's my age. I'm sort of old school. I like the idea of physical books. I like the idea of a big library in my house, and books that are marked up and tabbed, and sticky notes and all that sort of thing. But I've come to believe, for me, that's just not practical. One, I don't like the clutter of books everywhere in my house. It's hard, if I'm sitting at a desk reading a book, I can mark in it, fine. I can add notes or whatever. But what if I'm sitting on the couch reading? Well, now it's uncomfortable and trying to write, and it just doesn't work. And so I've come to now read almost everything, with one exception, but every nonfiction book on my iPad. I buy them from Amazon, Kindle books, and I read them on my iPad. And I'll explain why, but the one exception is I love used bookstores. So if I can go get a great hardback book for a couple bucks or a paperback for $1, there's one used bookstore in Washington, D.C., near Farragut Square, for those of you that happen to live or work in D.C., that just is pretty good and very inexpensive. So I like to buy used books that are cheap, and I will read through those, and sometimes then just donate them back, or if I really like the book, keep it. But most of the books I read on an iPad, and it gives me some advantages. First of all, I can carry my entire library of books with me anywhere I go. I'm heading out of town tomorrow to meet up with a number of fellow personal finance bloggers. We meet once a year, and we're meeting up for a few days. And I want to take my books so I can read on the plane or whatever, some downtime. And I take my iPad, and I've got everything. And if I want to switch back and forth between books, I can easily do it, which I often do. I'm often reading 3 or 4 books at one time. It's just sort of my approach. An iPad makes that very easy, and it's easy to read wherever you are, whether I'm reading in bed or on sitting in the family room reading, or I'm at a desk reading, which I don't normally do, I guess. But it's just more comfortable to read for me on an iPad, and that kind of brings me to point number 3, and exactly how I go about reading on the iPad. So with the iPad, it is very easy to highlight text as you're reading, and you can highlight it in a couple of different colors. You can also type notes. I don't tend to do that. It's a bit difficult to do on the iPad, but I do highlight in the book through the iPad, the Kindle app, and I have a pretty simple system. There are 4 highlighting colors that I use. And the first one is orange, and that just highlights the general concepts that I think are important, something that I can learn from, maybe something an angle on a topic I hadn't thought of, or whatever. But that's sort of my generic highlighting color, orange. And then if there are terms perhaps that are new to me, particularly in finance books or investing books, and again, having read a lot, I'm comfortable with most of the terminology, but occasionally you come across terms that are new to you. Or sometimes they just use a fancy word, and I'm like, I like that. I may try that. What the heck does that word mean? I highlight those in yellow. And there's a point to this, by the way. I'll come back to it. Why I highlight these. I don't just highlight them and then never see them again. But for terms, I use yellow. I'll keep track of things that I think make for an interesting quote. Those I highlight in blue. And then the fourth thing I highlight in red, and those are resources that I want to look up. So maybe they reference a book that perhaps I want to check out or read, or a website, or something that I want to go look up. That gets highlighted in red. And I do this highlighting as I'm reading. It's very quick and easy in the Kindle app. And that's sort of how I take notes. Again, you can type in notes on the iPad as well. I don't tend to do that. I just tend to use this pretty simple and straightforward highlighting strategy. Again, just 4 colors: concepts, terms, quotes, and resources. That's how I've broken it down, and that's what I do. That's what I highlight, whether I'm reading a complicated investing book or, most of them aren't complicated, but an investing book or a personal finance book, or I love books about productivity, business. It's the same. I use the same process, the same strategy, regardless of the book. And that is an important step, because it sets me up for the fourth of 5 things I want to share with you. And really step 4 and 5 are the most important to me. Here's the problem, and it's what steps 4 and 5 are designed to address. What I've found is I'll read a book, particularly if it's a physical book. I read it. I might think it's a great book. The Buffett Way is an example. I have that book. I have the hardback. An excellent book about how he invests. I highly recommend it, particularly if you invest in individual stocks. I have that in a physical book. I've read it. The problem is you read it, you stick it on your shelf, and within a day or two or a week, you kind of forget it. It's like, what is it that I read in that book? Thought it was a great book. What did I read in it that I'm now applying to how I invest in that case? Or if it's a productivity book, how I'm becoming more productive, more efficient with my time. You tend to read it, it resonates with you, but then you stick it on the shelf and you forget about it. That's been my experience. And I didn't want that to happen. I wanted to actually take the information that was useful to me in the book and use it in some productive way. So, step 4 for me is to actually reread the book. But here's how I do it. And this is why I really like reading with a Kindle app on an iPad. I don't open the iPad up to read the book for the second time. Instead, I open the book up in the Kindle app on my laptop. You can get the Kindle app for, I have all Mac computers. I have a MacBook Pro. And I can open up the Kindle app and bring up the book in the Kindle app, and it will have all of the highlighting that I applied to the book when I was reading it on the iPad. It's all right there for me. Nothing's changed. And so what I do is I skim through the book, and you can do this very quickly. You just jump from one highlight to the next highlight all the way through the book, and that's what I do. I jump from one to the next, and as I do that, second time around, and this, by the way, might be, it's usually not, it's not usually right away. It might be even be a month or two after I first read the book. Sometimes it's a few weeks, depends just on what's going on in my life and how important I found the book to be. But it's usually some period of time after I've read the book. And so sometimes I'll come to something I highlighted, and maybe it just doesn't hit me like it did the first time. And so I'm rereading it now. It's not all that particularly important to me. I might skip it. But for those concepts, those terms, those quotes, those resources that I want to look up, I'm now focused just on those. So this second time through the book doesn't take me that long. I'm just focused on the highlights. And now in this sort of the 5th step, what I do is I want to record this information in a way that will be useful to me. And there's a lot of ways to do it. What I find the easiest for me, and again, keep in mind, I'm not just reading for myself, I'm reading for this podcast and concepts that I might share with you all. I'm reading for articles that I might write on the blog, DoughRoller.net, or for my Forbes column, or whatever. So I'm kind of looking at this from a number of different angles. But I use Evernote, so it's very easy to capture the important information from the book using the highlights that I can now look at on my MacBook Pro and Evernote. So I can, if it's a quote, for example, I can literally cut and paste it out of the Kindle app right into a note in Evernote, and I just tag it as a quote. That's my tag, and I now have all of the quotes that I find interesting or motivational, inspiring, useful, whatever, with an Evernote tag of quote. And of course, you could add other tags if you want to categorize it further. Same thing with books to read. If the author has mentioned a resource, another book that I want to read, I can capture that in Evernote. If I absolutely know I want to read it, I might just skip that step and just order it on Amazon. But maybe if I'm thinking I want to read it later, or maybe I want to try to find it in a used bookstore, or sometimes I'll check it out from the library, I can record that in Evernote. And again, I have books to read as a tag. Same thing with article. I have articles to read as a tag. So maybe they've referenced a website. Maybe they've even put a URL in their book. I can go to that URL. Sometimes I'll just read the article right away. And if I want to capture it in Evernote, it's very easy to do with their web clipper, very simple. Again, I can tag it to read later, or if I read it then, I can give it whatever appropriate tags, depending on the subject of the article. The other thing I'll do is if the resource or the information in the book, or maybe it's I've highlighted it orange because it's a really important concept, and I want to share it with you all, I can put it in, I can tag it with either DR article for DoughRoller article that I might want to write down the road, or perhaps ask one of the writers that works with me to write it. Or I can include it in notes that I'm capturing for a future podcast. Or again, I could capture it for a Forbes article. But to me, the highlighting sets it up, but it's that fourth and fifth steps, that rereading the book, focusing just on the highlighting, and then taking what I think really resonates with me, what's really important, and capturing that in some kind of system. Again, I think Evernote is the easiest to use, is really the best way, not just to read a book, but to take the information, capture it in a way that will be useful. And so it's worked for me. It really doesn't. It may sound like this is like a whole big ordeal and takes a lot of time. It really doesn't. I find rereading the book. It's usually depends on the book and how much I've highlighted, of course. But it might be a 20-minute exercise. It may not be that long at all. And capturing it in Evernote is very simple. But the real takeaway is it's the only way I can think of to really make the information useful and actionable. Otherwise, I just find I'm reading a book, put it on a shelf, forget about it, and it's almost just pure entertainment maybe, but it's not really affecting how I manage our money or how I invest or our productivity, or if it's a career book, your career. And so I think this rereading the book a second time and capturing the important highlights in some form is very helpful and useful. And then, of course, with an Evernote, I circle back through depending on the tags. Oftentimes, I'll just look through the quote tags as I'm writing an article and find quotes that I'd put into Evernote years ago that might be useful to an article. Or sometimes, if I'm looking for a book to read, I can go to my books to read tag and go back through all the list of books that I've recorded in Evernote and pick one, and there you go. So kind of straightforward. There's not much more to say about it, but a number of folks had emailed me. That's how I read personal finance, investing, and other nonfiction books. And I think it's sort of the best way to retain what you've read and to put it into some format that's useful. So there you go. I hope that's helpful to you. If you have other strategies that you use, would love to hear about them. Just shoot me an email, dr@DoughRoller.net, and let me know. Or better yet, join the Facebook group, DoughRoller.net/Facebook group. Would love to have you, and maybe you could share your strategies and your tips in the Facebook group. All right, on to the Daily Dough. So this was, my wife and I were in Nashville the other day. We were actually on our way to visit our daughter who's in school out in the Midwest, and we were in Nashville. And I've never been to Nashville, and so we were downtown. We're in the car, I'm driving, and I had a general idea of kind of the direction we were going. We were going down a street, and I knew at some point I needed to make a right. I didn't know exactly which street. It kind of didn't really matter, but we were kind of going in that direction. I needed to take a right. And there was a car in front of me. We're stopped at a light. The light turns green. The car turns right. And I, pull up, and there's no pedestrians, not a lot of traffic. And I start to turn right. And as I do, I sort of glance up at the light, and I see a no right turn sign. I'm like, that's odd. Why in the world can't you turn right? That doesn't make any sense. And so I start to ignore it because the car in front of me turned right. And then I see it. It's a one-way street. It's a one-way street, and the car in front of me is going down the one-way street the wrong way. So, it's like jarring. It's like, and I, turned the car back. I was halfway through the turn. And so I turned the car back, and we went down to the next block and turned right. And I thought, it's amazing how easy it is to follow other people, and to make decisions because you see someone else do it. And that was a perfect example. It's like my mind wasn't even processing it at first. It was like, well, of course I'm just going to follow the car in front of me. Why wouldn't I? They turned right. Why shouldn't I turn right? And it got me to thinking, we kind of make a lot of decisions that way in life, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing to follow a strategy or a series of choices that perhaps have worked for other people, right? I mean, we do it all the time and without thinking. But it can lead to going down the wrong way. And I thought I would share that with you as sort of the daily dough today because, I think it's particularly prevalent in the world of personal finance and investing. And it's prevalent, I think, for a number of reasons. I mean, part of it is because some of the decisions we have to make are kind of complicated. I mean, I think they can all be reduced to pretty simple concepts and strategies. Well, even something like investing, I don't think has to be complicated. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. But it can be complicated, and we can feel a little intimidated by it. And I think when we start to feel intimidated by something, we're more likely to just follow what other people do. It gives us a sense of comfort, right? If everyone's investing in tech stocks, I feel good about it. I feel sort of validated. So who cares that it's 2000 and the tech bubble's about to burst, which we may not have known that at the time, but we should have known that tech stocks were grossly overpriced. But it feels comfortable. And I've even talked to people that were in that tech bubble and got burned, and they would say, "Look, I invested in Yahoo, but everyone was investing in Yahoo. I'd feel like an idiot if I didn't invest in Yahoo." And we that's just kind of it's built in. It gives us some comfort level that we're doing the right thing. And I guess the point I want to make today is not that we shouldn't consider what other people do, but we should, at a minimum, be aware that that's what we're doing. We should be aware that I'm making this right-hand turn because, one, it's sort of a natural thing to do, but two, I'm just following the guy in front of me. Again, that's sort of a different kind of example. But in the world of investing, if you're just getting started and you talk to some folks and you hear about index funds and it makes sense with you, but you don't have any investing experience, you don't fully understand all the concepts, but you've got this 401k at work and your money's got to go somewhere, and you're going to kind of follow other people and invest in index funds. Be aware that you're doing that. Be aware that your knowledge has some limitations right now. You don't have a lot of experience, and you're making this decision because of things you've read, or maybe who knows? Maybe you're because I invest in index funds, or people do. And that's fine. But if you're aware of it, why is that so important to be aware of why the motivation behind the decision? Because there's going to come a time, even as great as index funds are, in my opinion, there's going to come a time when, for some period of time, index funds fall out of vogue. I mean, they will. There'll be times when a lot of actively managed funds beat the indexes. That'll be particularly true in a bear market. It can be more common. And your strategy is going to be tested, and you're going to be wondering, did I do the right thing? So if you recognize why you're making that decision, hopefully what you're going to start to do over time is to educate yourself, to read more, to understand who you are and what motivates your decisions and what you value. And you may end up sticking with index funds. That's fine. But over time, you'll start to realize, you'll start to embrace the decision as your own, not just a decision you've made because that's what other people do. Or you might change it. You might say, well, yeah, I like index funds, but I also want some actively managed funds, or who knows, maybe you want to invest in some individual stocks or real estate or whatever. But you'll start to, over time, embrace the decision as your own and to educate yourself and to become a more informed investor. Again, I'm just using this as an example. But all of that starts with an understanding of why you're making the decision in the first place. So I don't want to sound too preachy. Anyway, I almost went down the wrong way on a one-way street because I was following another guy. I thought, we do that a lot in life. Again, it's not necessarily a bad thing to make decisions in part because of what other people do. But we should be aware, at least on the important decisions in life, that we're doing that and why we're doing it. And maybe that over time, we'll embrace those decisions and make those decisions for other reasons as well, maybe as we've educated ourselves or whatever. Another perfect example, by the way, is budgeting. When you're first starting out, you think, I don't know, how much should I spend on groceries? How much should I spend on a car payment? And maybe you follow the 50-20-30 budget, which we've talked about in the past, or some other budget. And you say, you know what, I don't really have any experience with this, but it resonates with me. Yeah, I'm going to do the 50-20-30 budget, or I'm going to do some other kind of budget. And that's fine, but you know why you're doing it. And over time, you'll get experience, you'll get more knowledge, you'll continue to learn how to manage your money, and you'll end up doing what works for you based on that experience and knowledge. And that's fine, but again, it starts with understanding why you're making the decisions that you're making and how much of your decision is being influenced by, one, other people, and two, a feeling of comfort you get because you're following the crowd. Just to kind of bring that full circle, and go back to the tech bubble. Warren Buffett got a lot of grief back then. People said he is old. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's out of he's out of touch with the times. He doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't understand technology, and he's missing out. And I bet you a lot of people sold stock in Berkshire Hathaway because of that, and I suspect they regret that now. That's not to say Warren Buffett doesn't make his own mistakes, as he will tell you. He certainly has made investing mistakes. But just try. We got to be careful when we get too much comfort from the fact that something we're doing, other people do too, right? We got to be really careful of that. And it's something that, frankly, I fall into. I think we probably all do. So that's the Daily Dough. There you go. And now on to the question of the day from Octavian. Here it is. He says, I have a few questions about your experience with HUD homes that you and your business partner have. 1, who performs maintenance on those houses? Do you have various contractors, or do you go with the same company always? 2, do you create a legal entity for renting, like an LLC or a corporation? 3, how do you split ownership with your partner? Is there a contract? Do you have a verbal agreement? And then he says, I have a friend who has good construction and remodeling skills. I would like to partner up with him and get into real estate, but don't want to miss anything important. Looking forward to your ideas. Well, that's a great question. So I will share with you how we do it, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way, but I think it works, and we'll kind of go through it. I'm going to actually answer his questions in reverse order because it kind of just makes sense to me. So the first thing in terms of ownership, we don't have a contract. We both are on the deed. We both own the home. It's 50-50. Beyond that, there's no contract, and there's really, I guess, no verbal agreement. Now, I'm doing business with someone that I've known since 1982, I believe, maybe 1981. Now, I say that with some hesitation because you could say, well, when you have a friend or a family member, you get into business, things can go really bad. I agree they can. And so I think in many, if not most cases, you probably want some form of a written agreement. In our case, though, with real estate, we're 50-50 owners. That is written, right? That's in the deed of the home. So we have that written, I guess you'd call it agreement, but documentation of the ownership. So it's not as if I could one day say, you know what, Mike, I now own 60%. You don't have a written agreement that says otherwise. Well, actually, he does. So he couldn't do that. Now, where you might want a written agreement is if you're going to take on different roles and responsibilities, and that's what it sounds like Octavian is considering. Between maybe his friend doing the construction and remodeling, and perhaps he taking on other roles. But I will say, when it comes to a partnership, and this is true of any partnership, I don't care if it's a business partnership or a marriage, it's never 50-50, right, in terms of the work effort. You don't want it to be 99-1. That's not healthy. But it's never going to be 50-50. And so, I think you need to know that going in, or the partnership's going to kind of get pretty rocky, I think, pretty quickly. But whether you need a written contract, it's going to vary from circumstance to circumstance. In our case, we have sort of an understanding of who does what. But in terms of the ownership, of course, it's part of the paperwork for buying the house. So yes, we're 50-50 owners, and that's documented. But beyond that, we don't have any sort of written contract that says, my friend Mike, he'll do this, and Rob, I'll go do this part. We just kind of work it out as we go. Now, all of our real estate's in Ohio, where my friend Mike lives, and we knew that going in, and we knew that as a result, he would end up doing more of the day-to-day, and he has. And that's just sort of a reality. But that's how we do it in terms of ownership. In terms of a legal entity, this is a very good question. We do not form an LLC or a corporation. The big issue there is liability, right? So we protect ourselves with insurance. Of course, we have insurance on each home, and then I have an umbrella policy in which I've included the 4 properties we own on the umbrella policy. So I have plenty of insurance coverage. You could, of course, own the property with an LLC or through maybe a corporation, but you're going to want to get legal advice in the state in which you own the property as to how exactly that's going to protect you. The other issue you may have is in financing. It could impact the mortgages and the financing that you're available to get, and at what terms. So my suggestion would be, 1, talk to a local lawyer that's very experienced in real estate law, and 2, talk to a real estate agent who owns investment properties. And that's really important because they're you want an agent who owns investment properties, and talk to them about how they do it. That would be my suggestion there. But again, we don't own the rental properties through separate legal entities. We just didn't feel we needed to do that to protect ourselves. We have the insurance coverage. Now, the third question about maintenance, this is really important. The first question is whether you want a management company, whether you want to hire a management company to manage the houses, which would mean they would advertise the homes for rent. They would deal with meeting potential renters at the home. They would get the house rented. They would deal with collecting the rent. And if maintenance issues came up, they would deal with getting the plumber or the electrician or whatever out to the home to fix it. Of course, you would pay for those maintenance costs. Plus, you would pay the management company. I found it to be about 8 to 10% of the monthly rent. And depending on where you are financially, that can cut into your profits significantly. It's not to say you can't make an investment work, but I'm sort of I like to bootstrap, so to speak, and paying a maintenance company to manage the home really can cut into the profits pretty quickly. So we don't do that. We manage them ourselves. And in terms of contractors, we don't go with the same company. First of all, we use different contractors for the rehab. When we first buy a home, it may need a lot of work. We may need a new kitchen, whatever, painting done, new carpeting. We'll hire a contractor to do that sort of work. And we have a handful that we've used in the past. Part of it depends on their availability at that time. And, the busier they are, the higher their quote. And if they don't have any work, you tend to get a better price. So, there are a few that we've used over the years and that he continues to use on properties he owns, separate from me. So we don't just stick with one contractor, but we do have a history with several. And then in terms of sort of day-to-day maintenance, it just depends what it is. I mean, we have contract plumbers, electricians, and whatnot that we've hired in the past that we'll use, but we don't tend to stick with just one company. Again, it depends on what the issue is, and it also depends on where it's located. We have some property on one side of Columbus, Ohio, and the property on the other side, and so we won't necessarily hire the same plumber, depending on the location of the property. But I do think this part of the real estate investing is where having systems in place and many options, many contractors, many plumbers, many electricians, that takes some work up front, but it's going to be much easier when you get that call at 2 a.m. and you've got to deal with an issue, and you've got plenty of options to address that issue, and it's all well documented. You've got their names and numbers. You can reach out to people very quickly. That is really, really important if you're going to manage the properties on your own. And, if you start with one property, why not manage it on your own? I mean, again, if it's going to be out of town or something, that's a different issue. Or if you just don't want to do it. But I think if you're just starting out, sort of bootstrapping your way into real estate investments, that's the best way to go if you can. So there you go. Hope those helped you. I wish you the best of luck. I mean, buying a HUD home, all our homes were bought from HUD foreclosures. And, we took homes that frankly had been run down and in good safe neighborhoods, good school districts, but had really been run down. We brought them back to life. And we're doing it to make a reasonable profit, but I think it's great to do something that helps the community and gives someone a place to live at a fair price, and that we can make a reasonable return on our investment. I mean, to me, that's just a win. I guess they call it a win-win. I hate that term, but that's what it is. And I think it's a great thing because a lot of the HUD homes that you buy, not all of them, but a lot of them are, they're a disaster when you go in there. And, they're an eyesore. We've had neighbors come up and say, I was so glad you bought this home and fixed it up because it's sat empty for 2 years or a year or whatever. And, it depresses home values in the neighborhood. And, who wants to live next to an empty, rundown home? So I think you can do a lot of good in your community, help give someone a place to live at a fair price, and, make a reasonable return on your investment. So I think it's great. I wish you the best of luck. Well, there you go. Hey, I hope you have a great day today. You can shoot me an email, DoughRoller.net. You can join our growing and vibrant Facebook group. Just go to DoughRoller.net/Facebook group. That will redirect you. You have to ask to join, and I would be happy to have you. So please do that if you haven't already. And if you haven't signed up for the weekly newsletter, DoughRoller.net/newsletter, it's a free newsletter that goes out every week that hopefully helps you make the most of your money with content, not only from DoughRoller.net, but from around the internet. So we look for other great content to include in the newsletter. It's not all just about me, all right? It's about finding good content that helps you guys make the most of your money. So if you don't have that newsletter, haven't subscribed, you can do that, DoughRoller.net/newsletter. There you go. Hey, until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.